Greetings, adventurers. We're going to continue with the Diceless RPG series. Today, I'm going to be distinguishing between Amber and its spiritual successors, the Lords of Olympus and the Lords of Gossamer and Shadow. Although Lords of Olympus came out first, I'm going to start with Lords of Gossamer and Shadow because it's more similar to Amber in theory. There's no specific Amber. There, as far as I know, isn't one world that is the ultimate reflection of all the shadows between it. And so you have a lot more freedom. It's more of a generic multiverse than the Amber world is, which gives it some benefits because you can do whatever you want with it and nobody can really complain, but also some downsides because there's a lot for you to create. There are additional source books for Lords of Gossamer and Shadow that can help you to find it, but the central theme of it is the grand staircase. Rather than just directly walking from one universe to another through the shadows, your characters need to open doors. I think this takes some power away from you, but it also makes things a little bit more concrete. You're definitely going to know whether you're traveling through the multiverse or not because you have to have opened a door. Your character needs to be a warden or a master of the grand staircase in order to travel through the multiverse. Although there are a couple of exceptions, there are people who can open doors who aren't wardens or masters, but this is just one of the main ways you're going to be expressing that same feeling for the multiversal infinite possibilities of Amber. It uses the same attributes, although it scales a little bit differently. Your characters are going to be starting as paragons of these different attributes, and that means you're roughly twice as much as what a typical person is. So while the setting is of course different from Amber, the powers are also very different. But I just wanted to put down the concept for Lords of Gossamer and Shadow. Next up is Lords of Olympus. Good morning, everybody. Today we're talking powers in the Lords of Olympus. There are more and more varied powers here than in Amber or in Lords of Gossamer and Shadow. And I think a part of that is they wanted to encompass all of the different abilities of the deities you could find. The first power is immortality. Here's where I'm going to note that a lot of these powers have prerequisites of attributes at the appropriate level. Here also I'm going to mention that the attributes in Lords of Olympus are a little bit different than those of the previous two games. Rather than psyche, strength, endurance, and warfare, the attributes are going to be ego, fortitude, might, and prowess. These all are going to be describing basically the same things, while in Amber, they don't have an absolute scale. They have a few references for what it is. In the case of Lords of Olympus, if you are at that appropriate level, you're about 10 times greater than a normal human if you're at the Olympian level. And Olympian ability scores are required to learn or acquire many of these powers, or to use these powers to their full effect. So, for immortality, you must have Olympian fortitude, and that's it. Your character is now some type of immortal. Other powers can give similar types of immortality, but this one gives you proper immortality, fit for a god. The next core power, which is very similar to Amber's pattern imprint, is going to be world walking. This was the previously discussed one, where you're going to be choosing one of the different roads, and then your character can travel through the different worlds. I feel like world walking is less integral to the story of Lords of Olympus than it is to Lords of Gossamer and Shadow or Amber. And so it's really fine if nobody has it. You can still have a very vibrant game, particularly if you were playing a modern gods type of game. Then if nobody has world walking, you still have a car, you still have a train, you still got a plane. Greetings, adventurers. We're back to the Lords of Gossamer and Shadow powers this time. And there are a few of them, very, very similar to what you got in Amber, with a few mixtures, a few new things as well. So we're going to start with the core power, the Warden of the Grand Staircase. This is not something that is learned precisely. It's something that your character is bestowed upon. The Grand Staircase more or less chooses its wardens in a very mysterious way. And then after your character has gone through whatever turmoils or missions, simply walking the staircase, they develop an intuitive understanding of the doors within it. Warden of the Grand Staircase is required for your character to perceive doors in the Gossamer worlds or within the Grand Staircase, as well as to open or close them. You could hold the door open, or you could hold the door shut against another warden, and these are largely determined by your character's psyche, their ability to manipulate the magical forces of the Grand Staircase, or endurance to see how long you can do so. An additional very impressive ability of being a warden of the Grand Staircase is known as exegesis. This means that your character can be understood in any of these worlds that the doors lead to. I think that's a nice thing just to get rid of the language barrier of some of these games. And while there is Master of the Grand Staircase, I'm not going to focus on that. It has some additional door-related powers, such as creating new doors or assigning a domain to a character, which allows for a lot of good character building. Then there are two opposite powers, Eidolon and Umbral Mastery. These are the two metaphysical poles of this multiverse, with the Eidolon being order and the Umbra being chaos. Both of them confer some type of immortality on your character. While being a master of the Eidolon means your character has stasis, has control and order in their current or preferred age, the Umbral immortality more like involves your character oscillating between a few ages. Maybe your character will become middle-aged or then age in reverse and then come back to their 30s, anything like that, which I think is pretty cool. Eidolon Mastery involves manipulating reality by controlling the patterns of reality. And there is a lot of good detail in the book about how this works, the different things you can do. Generally, just think of it as your character can bolster themselves or reality, while for the Umbra, being chaotic in nature, that's your character finding the warps in things or warping in themselves. So the Eidolon is for order, control, power, resilience, and the Umbra is for chaos, change, decay. Additionally, Eidolon Mastery allows your character to shapeshift themselves. So while they can also warp reality, they can shapeshift themselves and have some type of adaptive resilience to the different multiverses' forces. The next power is writing. That's Wrighting. With writing, this is very similar to the trump cards of Amber. You're creating icons that allow you to have a psychic connection or merely to communicate with other places or people or things across the multiverse without crossing through a door itself. Writing is a good facilitator, but is itself not as powerful as being a warden of the Grand Staircase for traveling. Writing is a good facilitating power, but is itself not particularly powerful for traveling the Gossamer worlds. Next up is invocation. This is the use of true names to control, commune, or power up different individuals. I think a lot of what you mythologically believe a person can do with true names is what you can do with invocations in Lords of Gossamer and Shadow. Then there are two things that I would consider magic. There are cantrips, which are the words of power from Amber. They give 20 plus examples in this game. They're just quick incantations that you can use for a simple magical effect that work in most Gossamer worlds. Both of these forms of magic your character can learn in most places, but again, not all Gossamer worlds have access to mana or whatever powers the type of magic. Next up is sorcery. In order to learn sorcery, the only primary requirement is your character understanding that there is a multiverse and that magic and power can be drawn from these Gossamer worlds in order to power your sorcery. Sorcery is diverse, time-consuming, and I think very rewarding to creative players. Just like in Amber, you're typically going to be crafting most of your spells and then leaving open what they're calling linchpins. They use the same verbiage in Amber. The linchpins are the last pieces of your spell that you want to save until you know exactly where you're going to be casting it. That could be the targets, that could be the flavor of the Shadow's magic where you're going to be in that universe, and whatever that linchpin is, keep it pretty open. But sorcery can accomplish a lot of things, which includes opening or closing some doors, assuming you know that they exist in the first place. While the Amber rules for artifacts, personal domains, allies, and creatures are somewhat loose, I find that they have a lot of good definition with Lords of Gossamer and Shadow. It's a lot of tables you can refer to the point cost for these different things. And I prefer that. I do like having a lot of fluidity in different things, but when it comes to character creation, what the point cost of things are, I like things to be a little more concrete. And so, much praise to the authors of Lords of Gossamer and Shadow for the creature, artifact, allies, and domain tables they use for these prices. Same thing with Amber. The reason why you might want to purchase these instead of try to find them in the Gossamer worlds is that then they become yours in an integral and universal level. So no matter what, your domain, you can more or less shape that reality, particularly if you have Umbral or Eidolon mastery in whatever way you want. While if you go to another unowned Gossamer world, it can resist you. It will fight back and return to its natural order. Same thing with any of these magic items. You might make them, but they're not going to work in every shadow. Your personal artifacts will work in every shadow. And that should be enough for you and us to move on to the Lords of Olympus. Next up, we have Olympian magic. At its core, Olympian magic is really more like manipulating fate, destiny, luck, and fortune. Your character can give curses of ill fortune or bestow boons of great fortune. You can twist destiny to a certain degree, and otherwise, its mastery abilities, which require additional point investitures, are what allows you to truly create and control different domains of this world. After that is primordial magic. While Olympian magic is the domain of the gods, primordial magic is the domain of the titans before them. Your character is going to be able to summon a maelstrom of chaos, and with that, alter reality. It has a lot of interesting interactions. Where your first creates this maelstrom, and it may warp you as well. So, metamorphosis is a suggested power to have to facilitate your recovery. And then you create lines of chaos, which are what you really use to either pull yourself or pull objects or people throughout the multiverse towards you. The primordial magic is very similar to the Logris of Amber. Then you have scrying, which is your ability to see through worlds, or essentially you take a reflective material, a pool of water, a mirror, and you can use that to spy on different creatures or places throughout time and space. There is metamorphosis, which at its core is your ability to take on different forms. We of course know that deities are well known for taking on animal forms or elemental forms, and that's what its core does, but the mastery abilities actually allowed you to make duplicates of yourself or to warp other people's bodies as well. Then we get more into the domain of what is very similar to sorcery. While there are the Olympian and primordial magics, which are more powerful, the words of power in this game are the ineffable names, just short incantations you can use in order to change the world or other people in very specific ways, cantrips more or less. There is elementalism, which depending on your character's ego, you may have access to more than one element. You can simply conjure, manipulate, or control these different elements, air, earth, fire, water, and that I think is a very flavorful ability that ties to your character's background, being one of the scions of a god, a deity, or a titan. There is enchantment, which is not your ability to make magical items. It's more like the D&D School of Magic enchantment. It's your power to control the minds of others. I think this one has a lot of ability for abuse. It's a very scary power and quite affordable for what it does, but just by making eye contact with a mortal, you can entirely ensorcel them or give them a geas of some sort. There is glamour. The powers of glamour are that of illusions. You can create figments of sound or light, or even entirely make somebody invisible. But because this game is based in a physical-ish world, if you are entirely invisible, 100% invisible, you also can't see, which I like having that type of pseudo-scientific application to powers. Otherwise, you are giving yourself a disguise, you are making illusory creatures or objects or buildings, or simply putting a veil of glamour around them to change how they look. If something doesn't exist, you could sort of make it exist with this, but that would be a very complicated or programmed illusion. Lords of Olympus also has a diverse array of demons and serpents and allies, and of course, domains you could have access to. I think that Lords of Gossamer and Shadow does a better job of defining these and what their costs are, but these are still pretty good in Lords of Olympus. Here's what would be my complaints about Lord of Olympus is that I guess they don't hide it from you, but this is really about like a Greco-Roman type of adventure. I really wish there was more Egyptian, Norse, Far Asian, South Asian, African, or even Native American styles of deities in this game. That's what I think would make it a more exciting thing, is to either have your entire adventure based in this diverse multi-pantheon, where your characters maybe are working to defend yourselves against the Titans, the Primordials, or anything, or maybe you're all vying to become at the seat of Olympus. This game is super Eurocentric, where it just says that Zeus is the king of the multiverse and doesn't question it at all. So it's got a little bit of a thorn in my side about that, but I still think the game has a lot of potential for fun. Besides that,